that mean it's David? Okay, Glendora, this is episode 6. About the procedure I'm going through with the courts and so forth, and which is a nightmare in itself. But anyway, in January 2001, the judge, Anthony Scarpino, became the new judge in Westchester Surrogate Court. And the court tried to clean up the old cases that had been lingering in the previous Judge Emanuele's court. Now, Judge Emanuele agreed to meet with the Westchester newspaper publisher owner, Ralph Martinelli, who played an important role in trying to help me. He knew my husband and liked him very much, and he remembered him quite a bit. So he, tried to help me with these things. Anyway, Ralph Martinelli met with the former judge, Emanuele, and he extracted from him the important information that White and Case had abandoned the estate as an estate attorney when they filed papers on behalf of their enduring client, Bankers Trust Company. It was for a repayment of a loan of $500,000 that my husband owed, which would be paid from the McCormick's estate. But since White and Case had represented their enduring client, Bankers Trust Company, they really abandoned the estate. Legally, they were not allowed to continue with the estate. But this happened around 2 months after death, and White and Case, namely Mr. Wynn Rutherford, fraudulently continued to say that they were the estate attorney, which I believe was actually criminal, since it was a serious conflict. Now, he said there were 2 conflicts. Judge Emanuele said 2 serious things in the estate at that point. But the other one he really didn't want to reveal. So we did a lot of research, and we finally found out ourselves what it was, which I can mention a little later. It happened that another friend and victim by the name of Jonathan Manny Place also heard a radio interview with the new judge who was coming in, Anthony Scarpino, revealing that he worked for the FBI, and then, believe it or not, he worked 2 years for Bankers Trust Company. Well, as we know now, that was another conflict, another red light. And it wasn't just Jonathan Manny Place and McCormick's estate. There were other estates also, some who probably don't want their names mentioned. But they also were, with the conflict. They were with Bankers Trust. They were involved with Bankers Trust. At this point, who was actually a convicted federal felon. Now, my situation was I had an attorney by the name of Peter Raymond, who was with Hall Dickler law firm, and he filed. I had been with him about 3 years, from 1997 to around 2001. Anyway, it was namely one lawyer there by the name of Peter Raymond, and he filed objections against the bank's alleged final accounting before he abandoned me. But really, after 3 years, he abandoned me, and he spoke with the children, who I was also paying legal fees for, about settlement. But they didn't officially really invite me, because of course they knew I was not going to take nothing for a settlement, or very little, whereas the children would. I think that's what he basically figured. So the game started. So then there was Leo Malonis, who was working for Pillsbury Winthrop law firm. He also filed a summary judgment after Scarpino became the new judge in 2001, I think this was, against me and the children to remove all objections that Peter Raymond had filed. He was actually a former chief administrative judge of New York State who joined the Pillsbury Winthrop firm, of which David Kiko belonged, who was representing the bank covering for Wynn Rutherford of White and Case. One covers for the other. They hire the other one. So anyway, this filing business gets very confused, because actually then the new attorney after Peter Raymond was Mark Oxman of Westchester, and he filed a response to the summary judgment filed by Leo Malonis and Bankers Trust. Also, the new attorney, Oxman, tried to get Scarpino, the judge, to recuse himself. We waited quite a while. He would not recuse himself. He refused to do it. So we waited, and finally we got publicity, which I have here up on the camera, which it's always a job getting publicity, because of course the bank will try to stop it if they can. I've had that several times. So anyway, this is a picture that I have up here of in my home in Dobbs Ferry, where they had all the posters around me, and widow victimized by Bankers Trust, and Judge Scarpino worked for Bankers Trust. So that was what we picketed with at times. We had different signs, but these were the important ones. Now in August, it was in August 2000, I don't know the exact year, 2000 probably, Scarpino called a settlement conference. At the settlement conference, the lawyer for the court, Rob DeBella, gave a talk to the children and myself in the law library, trying to frighten us about telling us that if we did not settle now, we could be in court another 10 years. Well, when I look back, of course, he should have said 20 years. But anyway, we spoke to other victims, and DeBella had told them that the court settled, after all these talks with us, settled 20 cases. However, they said there's one crazy old lady who will not settle. And of course, the people we know, they right away knew it was me. Now, when he had a meeting in the law library, he had a separate meeting for me. First, he had a meeting with the children, and he got them frightened, and he knew, I guess, that he could get them to settle for a little amount. So he had a separate meeting for me in the law library, in the judge's office, which included my attorney, and Rob DeBella asked me what I wanted. And my response, I waited, I hesitated, and I said justice. And his response, as I recall, was, "There is no justice in this court." He then said, "Would you like me to speak to the bank's attorneys in the next room?" Which was Leo Malonis and David Kiko of Pillsbury Winthrop, representing the bank. I answered and said, "Yes, of course." He went into the next room, and he came back after he spoke to them, stating, "They do not want to speak to you." Now, this is another shovel of bad faith, and thrown into a widow's face. I mean, this is a continuation of how they react. I mean, it's really the fox in charge of the hen house. I mean, you would think that the court would be in charge, wouldn't you? That they would say, no, I asked the bank to definitely come in here and speak with you. But no, they said they didn't want to speak with me. So, I know it reminds me of when we picketed in front of Deutsche Bank. There was a general counsel of Deutsche Bank, because Deutsche Bank had purchased Bankers Trust Company in 1999. Anyway, we were picketing out there, and the general counsel of Deutsche Bank came out by the name of Troll and Link. And he took one of our leaflets and he asked us what we really wanted. We said, well, we would like to have settlement talks. We'd like to settle. So he said, fine. He said, I will try to arrange it. So he did. And some people told us as we were picketing, some limousines drove up with people coming out with boxes of documents into the bank, and they said it was for the McCormick estate. Now, we found out Mr. Kiko, he wrote us, that is, or spoke to us, I forget exactly, but he made 3 demands, I know, which we hesitated first, and then we agreed and said yes, we would go along with his demands. I think one was no picketing and whatever. Anyway, finally, when we were ready to have settlement talks, Mr. Kiko said, well, you know, we decided that your demands, our demands, differences are too far apart. So again, it was in bad faith. I mean, how could he say that? Because I still don't understand. We never spoke about the issues. We didn't speak about them. We just agreed. And he said that our differences are too far apart. So he refused to meet with us. A little later, we found out that Troll and Link had left the bank, or I don't know whether he left on his own or what happened, but he did leave. They continually tried to divide and conquer. They were trying to get the children away from me, to get them to settle, and then I would be the last one standing. That was their strategy. So they got the children to settle for a very small percentage of what they were entitled to, and then executed a secret settlement agreement, which I was not, as an executor and wife and main beneficiary, I was not permitted to see it as a legal executor. They said at one point, well, if I signed certain papers, I would be able to see it, and I refused. I said, no, I'm an executor. So, you know, we wondered what was all in this settlement, and anyway, the fraudulent executor, Bankers Trust Company, and all executors were named. They signed for it. Eddie Jr., Herman, one of the other executors, L. House, the other executor, Bankers Trust, and White and Case. So they all signed, but they didn't have me sign it. Very interesting. Anyway, we did receive in the mail an anonymous lead to a website which had a purported unsigned draft copy of the settlement agreement. Part of this draft agreement involving all the parties included a letter stating that the bank had done no wrong, or words to that effect. So, I mean, who would ever sign a thing like that when you're struggling to get what you deserve, what you're supposed to have, and then you say the bank did no wrong? No, I mean, anyway, we discovered that Bankers Trust Company became a convicted federal felon, and as a result, they are prohibited by law from acting in any fiduciary capacity, which I can explain more later. But because of this, I guess, as far as federal felonies, Leo Malonis produced a certificate of relief from disabilities from the New York State Parole Board, which is, people think it's basically a get-out-of-jail-free card. What he should have been aware of or admitted is that it's no good, because this is a federal case, and it's the state of New York cannot whitewash a federal felony, and this was a federal felony. So he probably didn't want to admit that. It ends up, I have to know all about the law fighting for my justice according to the written will, because if you do not know the truth, they can cheat you in any manner or way that they want. So it's too bad that my husband and I picked White and Case and Bankers Trust Company because we thought they were real professionals. My husband knew more than I did, but he had 5 executors to try to help me to, get what he had left me. And it's just too bad that these people try to take advantage of a widow and do what they did to me. I believe the certificate of relief from the New York State Parole Board was just another fraudulent scam by the convicted federal felons Bankers Trust Company and their attorneys to prevent a major revolt and departure of their trust and estate business, because they have a lot of trust in estates. It brings a lot of money to them. So, they tried everything they could. My next attorney was Ray Dowd. He was recommended by Stan Smith of Ayers. We met a lot of people because through picketing and even publicity, people would call us and say they had the same problem or whatever they had. And so Stan Smith recommended this attorney. Well, we went and we decided to go with him. He went through the motions, this attorney, for about 1 year, minus charging me $250,000 for 1 year. They spent hours making up drafts. Actually, one was to claim legal fees for me as an executor fighting for justice in my husband's estate. However, they were not filed. They went through all kinds of drafts and, we'll file this, and then they never did. So finally, they did file a motion in regard to Deutsche Bank to open up the substitution of fiduciary to see if the McCormick's estate was transferred from Bankers Trust to Bankers Trust of New York. And I can go into that court case a little bit later. But that's the one thing that lawyer did, Ray Dowd. Now, Peter Raymond, my first attorney, had a signed retainer agreement from me. I was with him for like 3 years, and I paid for the children and myself the legal fees. And he had a signed retainer agreement with the children, and he had one, I believe, with me. But when he sued me, he ended up suing me for alleged legal fees, because see, the children had settled for a little, very little, and we were with him, but he did not actually officially invite me or encourage me, basically, to come to a settlement, even though I had met with Peter Raymond and his partner Tom Amlick in their office and said, look, I've been paying for the children and myself for about 3 years now, and I would really like to settle. I don't continually want to pay. So he ended up, we could tell they just wouldn't listen to me, so to speak. It was like they didn't hear me. They just didn't answer. So we figured we smelled something wrong. But anyway, it ended up that Peter Raymond got the children to settle for little. And of course I was left standing. So then it ended up, sure enough, Peter Raymond decided to sue me for more legal fees. But I had no settlement. So Peter Raymond had his signed retainer agreement with the children, and when he sued me for alleged legal fees, he could not produce a signed retainer agreement with me. And this was at a deposition that he had. And he claimed the suit was in regard to the purported legal fee that he claimed I owed, which was brought before a state Supreme Court judge, namely Louis Barone. Now, we learned later, we didn't know at the time, that he cannot sue me for legal fees in the Supreme Court. It has to be done in the surrogate court. Well, we didn't know that at the time. We were told that later. And my attorneys never related that to me in any way. So, it ended up, so basically, I found out later that everything they did was basically and legally, it was null and void. But anyway, I went through the mill with all of this, so to speak. Peter Raymond hired an attorney to represent him by the name of Lenny Benowich to oversee all these illegal activities he was going to bring up, and even went so far as to get a court order to take Social Security money out of my account in Florida, which is a violation of federal law, as I understand. They also, Lenny Benowich was a pretty tricky attorney, pretty experienced at trying to do his dirty tricks. And he attempted to open my safe deposit box, have it opened in Westchester County. So someone warned me about it ahead of time, and I hired a private detective to be at the bank, and the bank refused to open the box for Lenny Benowich because his demand had no legal standing, they said. It was harassment and intimidation for sure. He also attempted to get to a large amount of money of mine that was at a Charles Schwab Corporation. And when he got there, he was using Judge Barone, who was the judge in the Supreme Court who had my case. He used his paperwork. But when they got to the Charles Schwab Corporation, they laughed at him and told him, said this was illegal. They would not turn over my money to him. So then Lenny Benowich had Judge Barone rule that the Westchester County Sheriff post a notice on the front door of my home that they could seize all my property unless I came up with an exorbitant amount of money. Now, you don't tell me this was harassment of the highest order. Now, I hired 2 separate attorneys that they were recommended to us through friends of my group, and we hired them, and the judge called for a private conference with all the attorneys. One of the attorneys I hired came out of the conference and said to me, you know, really you're entitled to $100,000 refund, which, because of the way things went with the children, I was entitled to $100,000 refund with legal fees, whatever. However, the judge wants you to come in with a bank check of $125,000. As my attorneys, they suggested, even though it's not right, we suggest you pay it to get this all behind you. Just get the whole mess behind you. I discussed it and I reluctantly agreed. And my attorney went back into the conference room and informed the judge that I would agree to pay the $125,000. I got the bank check, and when they handed him my check, the judge then said, I don't know if anyone can believe this, but the judge said, do you think we could get $50,000 more out of her? My one attorney asked the judge, there were two attorneys there, but the one attorney asked the judge if Bankers Trust Company and Deutsche Bank and White and Case in Pillsbury were behind this. And he nodded his head yes. My attorney said, I'm going to report you. So the judge threatened him by saying, you're going to be back in the Westchester courts and I'll get you. And my attorney said, I haven't been here for 20 years and I will not be back for 20 years. And I will not be back for probably forever. So he told the judge, don't you dare threaten me. Okay, now the judge retaliated and imposed a $260,000 in legal fees, and then, believe it or not, he added interest of $150,000, totaling $410,000. Or if I didn't pay it, I'd be in danger of losing my home and all my possessions. So I had to go out and get and secure a very expensive mortgage on my home to settle this illegal judgment, which caused problems for me later. Glendora, I think my time is about up here for this episode, so I'll end it here and speak to you on another episode next week. Thank you.